Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you, band. Great truth that no matter what we're going through, when we praise God, praising God is a way that we can connect with our Creator and draw on strength that He has given us. God's also given us some great strength here, and tonight's guest, Angela Beise, is here to talk with us about how to deal with something that we're struggling with as a community, as a nation right now, and in so many ways, and that's grief. Angela, welcome to the Morning Star Church and the Reality Check stage. Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, well, I am on staff at The Crossing, based at Grants Trail as the group's pastor over the campuses. I'm, more importantly, I'm a wife and mother and grandmother of 5 children, 5 grandchildren, and from Mississippi. You may hear a little bit of an accent. I'm told there's a little bit left. I'm working
Maybe
on
a tad, but I married a Kentucky girl, so
okay,
yeah.
Okay, good. So you can understand me anyway.
I very much understand every word.
Good. But we love it here in St. Louis. Live in the city and love being here.
Yeah. So talk about your connection to the mental health field.
Yeah, it's so interesting when I teach some classes at a counseling center, and they call me the grief expert. And I wouldn't call myself a grief expert, but I would say I'm very familiar with grief. That's what I would say in a personal way. And in a nutshell, that is, our 4th child was born with a rare genetic syndrome. That initially what that meant was head-to-toe deformities that we spent years going through 30-plus surgeries and grieving that. Today, what that means is he's 25 years old, nonverbal. As he became a teenager, his behavior got aggressive for lots of reasons, because he lived in pain and neurological reasons.
Right.
My husband and I actually were on the mission field and moved home with him because he needed to be here. And as he got aggressive, we were looking for answers. No one knew what to tell us to do. And we found a neurobehavioral unit in Baltimore. And he spent 9 months there. Now, he's more like a 3 or 4-year-old mentally, so that was really hard to leave him there. But in that process, what they taught us is we needed to put him into care, that this needed to be, professionals needed to care for him. And so I'm just giving you kind of landmark moments we've had to seriously grieve and seriously do some business with God and expectations, and but we're very familiar with grief, and we've learned how to do it in an unhealthy way. And fortunately, with counseling and lots of good community and prayer, we're learning how to do it in a healthy way.
Well, thanks for that vulnerability and just allowing us to enter into your life, and so we know that, hey, this is not just an intellectual exercise for you.
Right, not at all.
This is a personal journey that you've been on.
In fact, if I had chosen something to be an expert at, it would not have been grief. It chose me.
Yeah. Can we just choose happy, right?
Can we just choose that? Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about how you define grief. It's more than just, losing, in your own experience. It's not just somebody has died.
Right.
We have grief.
I would define grief as the process of reacting to loss. And so many times people only allow you to grieve when there's death, or maybe something traumatic like the loss of a job or something like that. But what I've discovered is that loss is loss. And when you have loss, you need to give yourself permission, and people need to give you permission to grieve. For example, I have a friend who called me a few years ago just sobbing. Her son had just left for college, and she was just sobbing. And she was confused because she said, this is such a happy time, and we've prepared him for this, and we thought we were prepared for this. Why am I so sad? And that was grief over a loss, even though it was happy. It was a happy time. And so what's important, I think, is to recognize that we have to grieve loss. And that can take, I could sit here and list for you a million forms. When spouse is diagnosed with a terminal illness, when you're losing a parent to Alzheimer's, it can take so many forms. But what she had to do is pause and identify her loss.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the loss behind the loss. So the loss that her child was going to college, but what does that mean for me and my role and my identity? And so I would say it's the process of reacting to loss.
That's why I see so many dads walking their daughters down the aisle at a wedding, and they're the ones, everybody's smiling, and the dad's the one, just blubbering, right?
And even if it's the guy they would have chosen and the life they want for her, it's loss.
Yeah.
And we get to grieve those losses. It's like with us, in the beginning, it was so easy for people to say to me or for us to say to ourselves, but I still have my son. But at different milestones in his life, grief has ambushed us when I wasn't even expecting it, when he would have started school or the kids his age were getting married, and it's been real important for us to, instead of ignore it and try to sugarcoat it with at least this and at least that,
Right.
to pause and go, man, that's a serious, I'm sad. That's a serious loss.
Yeah. You said sad. How do we understand the difference between sad and grief?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I think they can walk hand in hand. I think sad can walk hand in hand. But I also think I had a counselor say something really important to me as I was grieving and kind of coming onto the other side of a serious time of grieving. And I sat with her and I said, I am so sad. I'm trying so hard to figure out how to not be sad. And she said something so good to me. She said, Angela, I think sad is going to be a part of your story. I just think you don't grieve forever, but to have a level of sadness, because this is sad. And she explained it to me like this, which has helped me so much. She said, I feel like we're like the conductors of an orchestra of emotions. And if you have a tuba that's blaring all the time, the orchestra's not beautiful. However, the tuba does bring a beautiful depth that you may not even notice because they don't play the solos and they're not featured,
Right.
but it brings a depth. And she said, I think sad is the tuba in your orchestra. And there are times that it's going to play a little louder, but then you get to say, I need you to play soft now. And instead of trying to spend all your energy kicking it out, you just you embrace it. So I feel like grief it comes and goes. We go through moments of grief. The great thing is, if you'll pause and pay attention, you don't live in a state of grieving forever. However, a level of sad can walk side by side also with happy and with contentment and with peace.
Yeah, and certainly forms who you are. It has the ability to be part of your journey and create empathy
Exactly.
for other people when they're going through grief and loss
That's
as well.
that's exactly. And I think the biggest gift you can give to someone who's grieving is to be comfortable with their sadness. And instead of trying to, so many times people want you to be okay. And they want to give you the answer. Well, yeah, but you have your son. Yeah, but look at this child's so much worse than yours, and that it's not helpful. And I think when we do experience sadness and we have dealt with grief, we are valuable tools in God's hand then as we walk with others.
Yeah. It's obvious that we can, most of us can see the connection between something like sadness and grief, but oftentimes other emotions kind of get masked as grief. Talk about that.
Yeah. I think any time you have a level of anger or despair, or you start seeing a lot of tension in your relationships, now those aren't necessarily grief, but it's something. And it could be grief. Often a red flag for me is when my reaction to something is bigger than the thing. You know what I mean? The husband doesn't take out the trash and your reaction is here, or someone cuts you off in traffic, and you have to start paying attention to, whoa, my emotions are higher than what this event called for. And so grief can be that thing. And so I think anytime we're experiencing despair or anger or a level of frustration or hopelessness, we do need to pause and figure out what that is.
I like to use the analogy of like a warning light
Yes.
on the dashboard of your car. Like something comes on, it's like, hey, pay attention, be aware. You're not going to crash, but if you don't make some changes, take it in,
Right.
get this addressed. So look deeper, look under the hood, right?
And
what
that's a
you're
great
saying.
analogy too, because when you get your oil changed because the light told you to, you're not going to be surprised months down the road when that needs to happen again. Right? Because this is an ongoing, grief is not a one-time thing. Right. And checking your level of anger is not a one-time thing. It's something that I think our tendency, our human nature is always going to lead us back away from all that God has, the freedom that God has for us. And we have to constantly watch those warning lights. That is not a one-time thing.
Well said.
So,
and now here we are in the midst of this global pandemic.
Yeah.
We've got a national economic crisis, people wondering if I'm going to go back to is there going to be a job for me? Do I go out or not? And, the racial tensions.
Wow.
Just layer after layer, how has that affected, people in terms of grief?
yeah. Oh, I think it's affected us in a huge way. First of all, there's more to grief. We do have people who have lost their jobs and who, we just spent 2 weeks with our children who have these are young families trying to work from home with all their children at home. Even that is a grief. They're trying to make it through the day,
Right.
and they don't know when an end to that is coming. It's one thing when you can see an end sign, but I think even bigger than that, Mike, I think we were created for community. We're created, for example, right now you have people being diagnosed with cancer, and they're not going to church on the weekends where people can physically touch them and pray for them.
Right.
I've got friends who have lost loved ones, and it's so important. I think we've lost touch with how healing it is when your community comes around you,
Right.
and they show up to grieve with you, or a wedding, even things like a wedding, or graduations, or happy and sad events. We're not showing up on the weekends. Even the boost it gives us to come together every weekend as a church community.
Yeah.
And so I just think even my introverted friends are starting to feel it.
Right.
We were created for community.
Yeah.
And we were created to do this together.
It's one of the things that makes this crisis so different than like 9/11.
Right.
Because at 9/11, we could come together, we could grieve, we could share our hopes and fears and lean on one another.
Yeah.
And now we have all these exterior pressures pushing on us without that ability to connect.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just the coming together is so important.
It is, which is why, memorial services, funerals, that closure, you don't do it for the person,
Yeah.
who's been lost. We do it to, bring our collective, this cathartic
Right.
emotion of loss.
And my passion is small groups, and even the fact that these small groups have not been able to come together has been such a stress
Yeah.
on people.
And we can connect on Zoom, and that's
Right.
helpful, but there is something about literally being in the same physical space.
There
And
is.
I think, it may sound new agey or whatever, but I think there is something about we feed off of one another's
absolutely.
energy, right? I think there have
Absolutely.
been actually studies done medically that, what we miss out when we're doing life on a screen.
Even physical touch. Just to be able to hug each other or hold your hand when I pray with you, or that it's a super interesting time. It really is.
Let's address parents out there, because one of the
Okay.
things we want to do in this segment is always equip parents to know on their kids. Kids can actually experience grief as well,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
What as parents do we need to look for that may be masking something else, and to understand
Right.
that our kids are actually grieving?
Right. Well, first of all, I think I would say kids are really smart. And you cannot hide from them when you're feeling a level of sadness and grief. So I think whatever their age is, whatever's appropriate for them, to be honest about what's happening because you want to give them permission to grieve. You're teaching them by how you live how to walk through hard times and how to walk through sad times.
Right.
With watching my grandchildren now, I would say things to watch for is their level of anger and their level of fear. I heard my little granddaughter, as my son was going to the store last week, and she's 5. And as he walked out with his mask in his hand, she said, "Be careful, Daddy. Be careful, Dad." So they know the fear. And the playgrounds are roped off, and they're sensing the fear. Regression, if they regress in their toilet training or bedwetting, nightmares, I would really pause and have them tell you what those nightmares were, and just to keep an open dialogue with them.
Yeah, thanks for that. But we also, when we begin to sense that sadness has kind of, escalated to more of a grieving, what are things that you can tell us how we can identify that, and maybe some steps or tips to kind of begin to work through?
Yeah. Well, first of all, watch for those triggers. Watch for the overreaction. None of us want to walk through grief, but when loss happens, we're going to have to. I feel like Jesus modeled that for us so beautifully. When, if you know the story, when he showed up and Lazarus had died, and the 2 sisters asked him, "Where were you? We're so confused. We don't understand." He knows resurrection is coming. He's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. But those 2 words there where it says that he wept, to me, that going through my grieving, that gives me so much permission, because what we want to do is we want to skip grieving and go straight to, but Jesus heals, but God has a plan, but everything's going to be okay. And we want to skip grief, but I wish it told us how long he sat and wept with them. But I think what he did was he paused because their human hearts had been wounded. And he paused to weep and to grieve with them. And I would say, first of all, as much as possible, don't do it alone. Invite people in, be honest. We got into counseling, and it's never a bad idea to pull in a pastor, pull in a counselor to really help you walk through that.
Right.
And I think one of the most important things we can say is that only Jesus can heal a human heart. And don't stiff-arm God in the process, and don't, the enemy loves to come along and lie to us in times of grief, and to make us question God's goodness and question God's character and question his faithfulness. And I would say lean into those questions, but lean into it with your face turned toward Jesus.
Yeah.
Because he came a long way and paid a high price to be able to walk through that with us.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think the faith aspect is so important, and it's one of the biggest tools we have in our toolbox to kind of work through, not sweep it away or sweep it under the rug or deny it. And I think oftentimes Christians have been led to believe that, well, God's got a plan and God's going to work everything together for good. And so we can actually use our religion to actually deny those deeper feelings. And yet you pointed out that we have a God who knows how to grieve and grieves with us. Gives us permission to own those feelings, that it's not a lack of faith.
Right. Well, and that's right there, a lack of faith. Because we can call it a lack of faith because we pause and grieve, but I have discovered, and what I think is real faith, is trusting him to walk you through it. Denying it, in my opinion, is almost a lack of faith. I would say a real faith is like, I'm going to allow him to walk through this with me. And the bottom line is, the world is not as it was supposed to be. The Bible tells us that all of creation is groaning, and we're just taking our place in what it is to be human when we're feeling weakness and when we are grieving. But we do have a Savior who is faithful to walk us through it.
Thank you so much for saying that. That alone was worth the price of admission for some people out there to have permission to be able to grieve. Any final thoughts? Something I should have probably asked you, that, hey, talk to the folks in the camera. Let them know
Yeah. Well, I would say give yourself permission to grieve. You know, we've talked about that. And one thing I have learned along the way is to give grace to the people in your life as you grieve. And let me say it like this. We've read a lot of books about what not to say to people when they're grieving, but I want to speak to the person who's going through long time grief. Like our grief has really on and off been 25 years long. And there are people who just aren't equipped to walk that long road with you. Have grace for them. Have grace for the people who want to say something but say the wrong thing. Can we have grace for each other? And and then I'll just end with this. In Lamentations, if you go read Lamentations 3, and in the New Living Translation, I just stumbled upon it one day where he's grieving all that has happened. All seems lost. He says, peace has been stripped away. I don't even remember what it means to have peace anymore. And there's a line right there in chapter 3 that says, everything I have longed for from the Lord is lost. And I have been in that place. The thing I feared most has happened. And I feel like everything I longed for, even from the Lord, has been lost. And I have been in that place and sat in that place. But if you read a little further, he says this, and yet I still dare to hope. When I remember this, and then he talks about who God is, what God's done in the past, regardless of what I see, can I remember who he is? And my challenge would be, dare to hope. Dare to hope.
Embrace the grief. Don't deny it.
But do it with hope.
And that takes us back to the very song that we heard from the band earlier.
That's right.
Even in the midst of all this, we can still praise our God because he is with us and he is for us. Angela, thank you so much for being with us and imparting so much truth and some practical tips to help us through this season. Would you join me in thanking Angela Beise?
Thank you. Great to be here.
God bless you.